Serious people that do autopsies. What's the weirdest thing that you have found that didn't have anything to do with the person's death? I worked as a pathology assistant. My boss once found a 6-inch builder's nail in a chap's thigh. He'd died on site after an accident, but the nail was all healed over, even where it had nicked the bone, so it must have been there a few years. A paramedic buddy showed me pictures of an accident where the guy was carrying a nail gun up a ladder to a roof and accidentally drove a nail through his pocket, the iPhone in the pocket, and into his femur. The hospital did imaging to ensure it wasn't going to blow an artery and then just yanked it out. I'm not sure my face will ever be able to move from the expression of cringe this prompted. It gets even better when you realize just how fucking massive a 6-inch nail is. UK. Gang member's mother, 87 years old, died of a heart attack during a home invasion. Gang had burst in looking for drugs and money. No signs of assault, but the circumstances required a full examination to be sure nothing suspicious had occurred. During the post-mortem, 2 ounces of smack found in her anus. Back in the 90s, I worked for the company that was contracted to move bodies for the coroner. We picked up the body of a lady who had worked as a tailor in her youth. When they did the post-mortem, there were several dressmaking pins and needles under her skin, mainly in her legs. There was also a pin lodged in her lung. Coroner thought she must have inhaled it. She'd suffered a pulmonary embolism back in the 60s which had forced her to retire. Maybe the pin was the cause of it. How she hadn't felt the pins or that none of them had been picked up on x-rays or scans she'd had in later life, I don't know. Cause of death was a stroke. I sew as a hobby and I always catch myself putting the pins in my mouth to hold them while I adjust something. Then I'll have visions of like, what if I started coughing or something and accidentally inhaled these pins? And then I freak out and I'm very careful not put them in my mouth for a while until I inevitably do it again absent-mindedly and start the freak out process all over again. I was once in a mental health facility for only a short amount of time. And I met a woman whose daughter passed away from a drug overdose and had been upset at her for selling her grandmother's necklace for what she thought was drugs. But when the autopsy came back, it was found in her stomach. Apparently she was swallowing the same necklace for years, and I can imagine why someone would do that. You could always look on the brighter side and think that the necklace meant so much to her. She kept swallowing it so that any dodgy dealings wouldn't be able to steal it from her to pay for drugs. Rolls of dollar bills inside the vaginal cavity. Removed it and let her property dry, and then returned to the family with the rest of her belongings. So wash your hands after handling money. Edit, maybe 50 bills. But can't remember if they were singles or large bills. Cause of death was an overdose, I think, but not sure. When I was a student, I saw an autopsy of a man who had hanged himself. When we checked the main arteries in the heart, he had a huge blockage. He was basically just about to have a huge heart attack, so probably would have died anyway. Sorry, pretty grim. One of the major symptoms of a heart attack is sense of impending doom. Kinda makes me wonder if that was his final straw and he would have died later the same day of the heart attack. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a weird thing, but once during an autopsy, I had just put the body onto the table on their stomach and the person had explosive poop. Luckily, the doc who was standing right beside them moved in time, or else they would have been shot with poop. We didn't think it was ever going to stop. I was volunteering at the coroner's office and the doc pulled a very large, intact avocado pit out of a man's stomach. We all kind of looked at it and went, huh. Cause of death was a heart attack. While completing the post-autopsy repair for a gentleman, I found a plastic ladle tucked under the ribs. It was probably left by some poor autopsy technician who got yelled at for losing the good ladle. I offered to send it back to the coroner, but they never returned my calls. What is the purpose of a ladle for autopsies? You use it to collect fluid collections, effusions, for a measuring jug. Someone with heart failure can get fluid buildup in their pleural cavities, around the lungs, for example. Sometimes several liters. Okay, this isn't an autopsy, but I work in a pathology lab and we get all the parts that are removed from a human during surgery. Tumors, moles, appendages, stones, kidney, bladder, gallbladder etc. One day a large, long, Cylindrical stone was removed from a man's penis. We have to break the stone down to its chemical components so we can tell what it's predominantly made from, i.e. calcium. So we put this stone in solution, and as it dissolved we realized something was in the center. It was a big pen cap. There's no way it came from above. As someone with occasional small kidney stones, FCKING ouch. There are the normal abnormal things like extra spleens, extra ureters, surprise tumors, and swallowed foreign bodies. The record holder was $6.25 and a sorted change. The one that wins is a Sharpie in the bladder, with the cap on. I was the one that got to explain what sounding was to the resident and lab assistant. Sounding with a Sharpie. Yikes, that might be enough of this thread for me. Sounding with a Sharpie and then just going oh well when it slips all the way inside and never comes out. Wow, I've got a lot of stories for this one. We once had a homeless dude who was on opiates. This comes in a lot. During the external exam, we removed his pants and they were just full of bacon. Like, at least 40 packs of bacon. Turns out he had shoplifted a ton of it, then shot up in some rundown house and died with it all in his pants. It was pretty shocking. We also had a guy who took a bullet to the back of his head, execution style, and after the x-rays determined the bullet was not in his head anymore. We couldn't find the exit wound anywhere. Once we took out the brain, we discovered it exited perfectly out of one of his nostrils, leaving no trace of an external exit wound. 5 years ago, an autopsy I viewed, the patient was put down to have died from post-surgical complications from a colostomy infection lead to sepsis. When they began the examination and looked, they found some surgical tweezers left behind, which was attributed to being cause of the infection because of how tucked away they were. I'm unaware of what happened afterwards, but it was definitely referred higher. As if I wasn't already afraid of surgery. This makes it so much worse. You would think that if you were suffering from such a terrible infection after a surgery, they would do everything possible, including take x-rays, to try and figure out how to help you, and also cover their own asses post-surgery. One of the cadavers we learned from in med school had his sciatic nerve somehow passing through the middle of his piriformis muscle. It wasn't fused to the side of the muscle via scarring. It ran right through the middle of the muscle. His medical history was unknown, but we expected that sciatic nerve pain was probably on the list. I think of him when a patient doesn't respond to typical treatments for things. Sometimes people are built differently than everyone else, and you have to think outside the box to figure out what's going on. Sometimes you wish you could peek inside someone and not just have to treat from the outside. Incidental finding of a toothpick lodged in the small intestine. Wonder how much pain that person felt. My dad accidentally swallowed a toothpick that hadn't properly been removed from his food, and it poked a hole in the lining of his stomach. He had awful stomach pain for months. Doctors thought it was stomach cancer until they finally discovered it. Edit. We think that it was used in his food out to eat at a restaurant. Either broken in the food or not removed properly, and so he didn't know to be mindful of it. He does, contrary to popular belief, know how to chew his food. My new fear. This whole thread is fear inducing for the smallest things that I would have never imagined can go into my body. Universe, you are crazy. My forensic medicine lectures took place in the department's Museum of Oddities. There are plenty of interesting items on display, but one particularly strange display caught my eye. It was an unlabeled cardboard box with 20-inch thin metal bars 10 centimeters, around 4 inches, long. One of the pathologists explained that the random pieces of metal were actually spoon handles which were found in a young woman's stomach. The remaining portion of the spoons was melted away by stomach acid. The woman was a patient in a psychiatric hospital in the 50s/60s and evidently had a tendency to swallow spoons. But her unusual diet had nothing to do with her cause of death. Can't exactly remember what it was. On a more humorous note, the museum also features a variety of strange tattoos. My favorite was a tattoo on the left upper thigh of a soldier which read, Nerferdamen. I.E. Ladies only. I worked in a cadaver lab. People would donate their bodies to science. We would essentially cut them up into different cuts depending on what hospitals, med schools or researchers wanted. Most of the tissue went for surgical practice. A torso would be sent out for spinal surgery practice. A leg for knee replacement practice. Once we had a donor who died during surgery. We found a very large pair of scissors inside of him. We also had lots of donors with evidence of cancer, like tumors all over their lungs, with no medical history of cancer. We found a lot of abnormal or enlarged organs. We once removed a 50-pound liver from a guy, and also we found horseshoe kidneys, 2 kidneys fused together, in a person. Reading this only reinforces the idea that getting full body scans of some type should be an annual requirement. An 88-year-old grandma died of carbon monoxide poisoning. During the autopsy we couldn't open the back of the cranium. After much drilling we realized that her cranium was around 3 to 4 centimeters thick all the way around, leaving her with the smallest brain on a grown woman I've ever seen. She was fully functioning and never seemed affected by it in the slightest. I've never seen anything like it since. Edit. I knew she functioned well until her death, because she ran a soft cheese making business with her daughters. She died when the gas tank used to heat the milk leaked carbon monoxide into the room and she passed out and died. One of her daughters also passed out, but her face was close to the space under the door and fresh air came in, enough to prevent her from dying. I asked the family if she or they had known of her condition and no one had any idea. Physically there was nothing remarkable. No deformities at all visible externally, neither in body nor face. We included the information in the autopsy report, but since it wasn't related to the cause of death it wasn't investigated further. Just for clarification, I'm female with a background in forensics and profiling. Hope this helps. What is the average skull thickness? 5 millimeters. Less than a centimeters? So a 4 centimeter skull would be around 7 times thicker? That's effing insane. Thanks for context. Spoke with a pathologist at a conference. During her training at the medical examiner's office, they were doing an autopsy on a body that was found by a river. They did a court and something looked funny about his gut. When they opened him up, his stomach moved. It was a snake that had burrowed inside his body. It struck and bit one of the techs before they realized what was going on. This reminds me of Autopsy, Room 4. It's a short story by Stephen King. Basically, a guy bitten by a snake that renders him completely paralyzed and everyone thinks he's dead. They finally find the mark on his inner thigh. The snake came out of his pants and struck out at someone from the bag. But he laid there and listened to the entire prep of them about to crack open his ribcage. Creepy story. I highly recommend it.